In part 1 of The Bank War, we stepped back and looked at the characters who built the United States into a sovereign, self-sufficient nation, and how different leaders at different moments shaped the country to reflect their ideals. Their ethics, their economic philosophies, and their ideologies were not abstract. They were embedded directly into the Constitution, in how it was written, how it was interpreted, and, depending on your view, how it was bent or manipulated. Decentralized versus centralized banking. Hard, safe money versus flexible, opportunistic paper credit. These were not just technical disputes. They were direct reflections of the Founding Fathers' competing visions. All of them spoke the language of freedom, but they held very different beliefs about how freedom was achieved. From its earliest days, the United States struggled to define its identity. Caught between the ideals of a free republic and the hard constraints of making that vision work in the real world. Just 20 years after the creation of the first highly contested, and to many, unconstitutional, national bank, it was dismantled and dismissed as unnecessary, even dangerous, for a nation that sought independence from parasitic financial power. Yet, only a few years later, after alienating shareholders, antagonizing the most powerful empire on earth, Britain, engaging in reckless trade policy, and reducing its naval capacity, the United States found itself brutally unprepared for the realities of standing alone. The War of 1812 exposed those weaknesses. When it ended, the national bank returned. What followed was a period of explosive growth. The United States did what it did best. It promoted investment, expanded credit, and built a vast industrial economy in the North, alongside an agricultural kingdom in the South, a system that appeared, on the surface, to be self-sustaining. But there was a problem. Life was too good. Opportunity was abundant. Credit was easy. Optimism was everywhere. The so-called era of good feelings had an expiration date, as it always does, in both ancient and modern societies. And that expiration arrives when the financial bubble that created those good feelings finally collapses, leaving someone holding the proverbial bag. At the center of that collapse stood the Second Bank of the United States, a powerful, controversial institution, once again accused of being unconstitutional, and now deeply entangled in the nation's economic pain. And as history repeatedly shows, it is in moments of mass hardship, anger, and elite failure that populist figures rise. Andrew Jackson had already tasted political defeat in 1824, a loss he blamed on what he called the Hydra of corruption. But in 1828, carried by a wave of popular resentment and democratic energy, he returned, victorious. His comeback echoed a pattern that feels strikingly familiar in modern politics. This time, Jackson did not just win the presidency. He arrived with a mandate. Although Jackson did not enter the White House declaring immediate war on the banks, his arrival in the presidential chair was met with something far more dangerous to entrenched power: mass jubilation. To his supporters, Jackson had come to purge corruption from the seat of government and return political authority to the people themselves. And they loved him for it. His inauguration made that reality impossible to ignore. An estimated 10 to 20,000 ordinary Americans, farmers, laborers, frontiersmen, flooded Washington and poured into the White House to celebrate his victory. And from this very first moment, the fault lines of the coming conflict were already visible. Newspapers aligned with the National Republican Party, soon to rebrand themselves as the Whigs, seized the scene as an opportunity not to reflect on the problems that led to them losing their power in office, but instead to attack. What was meant to be a ceremonial reception for elite, well-to-do Americans was instead described by Jackson's enemies as a rowdy party. Evidence, they claimed, that Jackson represented disorder, not democracy. Jackson and his staff, for their part, made little effort to restrain the chaos, and probably even encouraged it. Contemporary accounts suggest wine was poured onto the lawn to draw the crowds outside. To Henry Clay and the National Republicans, this only confirmed their worst fears. They described the scene in horrified terms: a rabble mob of boys, Negroes, women, children, scrambling, fighting, romping. This language mattered. It was not merely discussed, it was strategy. By portraying ordinary citizens as an unruly mass incapable of self-restraint, Jackson's opponents sought to prove that Washington had fallen under mob rule, that Jackson and the people who supported him were unfit for self-government. But, as the story unfolds, something interesting becomes clear. These newspaper attacks, rhetorical bullets intended to wound political opponents, did not weaken Jackson or his supporters. They strengthened them. Each insult hardened loyalty. Each dismissal deepened identification. The more the press talked down to them, the more unified and resolute the populist base became.